Okay, so chapter 9, it's about the muscular system. So in this chapter, we're going to start looking at the components of skeletal muscles. We're going to review again histology, but in this case of muscle, it's going to be a skeletal muscle, and then we might compare it to smooth and then cardiac muscle. We're going to know the names of the muscles, their action, their location, and major classification of skeletal muscle together with their functions. So, and then we are going to see the exact location of muscles in the shoulder, upper limb, and then in the hip and the lower limb. And then we're going to demonstrate some of the actions of these muscles. So, muscles, they are major players in the movement of joints or articulations. Skeletal muscles, for the most part, they are attached into the bones in our skeletal system. Some of them, they are not, like muscles of facial expression. They are inserted into the dermis of our face. And one of the functions is to help to coordinate the body movements so we can have smooth body movements and then control these body movements. Now, muscles, they have 2 points of attachment in the skeletal system, a proximal and a distal attachment. The proximal attachment usually is non-movable, and the non-movable attachment, we call it origin. While the distal attachment, it is the movable insertion or attachment, and this one we call it insertion. Most muscles have the origin proximal and the insertion distal, and we have few exceptions. We will see which ones is the exception. Now, typically, the ones that crosses joints or articulations can help to move this joint because you will have the proximal insertion in the proximal bone and then the distal insertion in the distal bone, and that basically shortens the distance between the bones when you contract them. So you can perform a specific movement. Now, we're going to see what these movements are and exactly how these movements are produced. So, basic functions of the muscular system: production of movement. How? By contraction, which will be sliding the proteins that make the muscles over each other to shorten the distance between these two proteins. Also, muscles of the skeletal system or skeletal muscles help us to maintain posture. So for instance, when you're standing, and then stabilize the joints. Some of them, with their tendons, they help to bring these bones together so that they don't move as much. So that provides stability. And muscles, when they contract, they generate heat. So muscles themselves, they have their own storage form of energy, and then their glycogen, when it's burned through glycolysis and glycogenolysis, of course, you will dissipate heat. And then we have in our muscle cells receptors for a hormone that is called tyrosine. And that helps also to increase the metabolism of the muscle cells. So, for instance, there is a disease that is called hyperthyroidism, in which a person has high levels of thyroid hormone, and then this person often it is having a lot of heat in their body, so they are intolerant to hot weather. And it is well known that someone who has hypothyroidism, they don't metabolize as much uh, the nutrients that the muscle uses, they don't generate as much heat, and one of the signs and symptoms is that the person is cold when they have low levels of thyroid hormone. So then generation of heat, it's another function of the muscles. Muscles also support soft tissues, like for instance, the muscles of the pelvic floor. They help to support all the organs that we have internal in the pelvic area, like the anus, the uterus, the vagina, the urinary bladder, the ovaries. So they help to support then these organs. And then the muscles of the abdominal wall supports all the muscles from the abdominal cavity, like the intestines, the pancreas, the liver, the kidneys, okay? So protects and supports soft tissues and controls openings. We have circular layers of muscles that we call sphincters. And these sphincters allows the entry of substances and exit of substances. So regulate the passage of substances through the body. So gross anatomy of an skeletal muscle, what it is? Well, it is actually seeing the cells of the muscle, which are the muscle fibers. Muscle fibers, if you remember from the skeletal system, are long, cylindrical, and they have band patterns that we call striations. And these band patterns corresponds to actually proteins inside these muscle cells. Proteins like myosin and actin. That when you shine light in a microscopic view of these muscles, the light can go through and create light bands, and then the light don't pass as much and then create what we call dark bands. And then you have alternation of dark bands and light bands. And that forms this pattern of bands or striations. The muscle fibers are surrounded by a membrane that it is thin, delicate connective tissue. This is endomysium. Endo means inside, mysium means muscle. So each individual muscle fiber is wrapped around by an endomysium. And then these muscle fibers, they congregate, they form groups of 10 to 100 muscle cells, and these groups are called fascicles. So this is the name, fascicles. And fascicles are wrapped around by a membrane that is a little bit more thicker than the endomysium, but this membrane is going to be called perimysium. Peri means around the muscle. So fascicles are surrounded by perimysium. And then several fascicles all together form the complete muscle. And the complete muscle will be wrapped around by a membrane that is called epimysium. If you remember, in many of these previous structures that we have seen this prefix of the word epi. Epi means above. So epimysium, above the muscle. So that's the membrane that covers the entire muscle. And this connective tissue, the endo, peri, and the epimysium, as they run towards one of the ends of the muscle, they merge and they form a tendon. And the tendon is dense, regular connective tissue. The fibers, the collagen fibers that run parallel, and then these tendons, they insert into a bone. Now, a characteristic of skeletal muscles is that they use a lot of oxygen and a lot of nutrients, a lot of glucose. That's why they have their own form of storage, which is glycogen. And then because they require a lot of oxygen and a lot of nutrients, they have to have rich blood supply. So you have a lot of blood vessels. And as well, something that happens because you are utilizing a lot of nutrients is that you will be generating heat, of course, we said that, and also you will be generating ATP. So muscles are typically high in mitochondria, the organelle that produces this ATP. And as well, muscles, they have extensive nerve supply. So you have a lot of nerves that controls the contraction of these muscles. And then certain muscles, they have more nerves than others and will be the ones that they are used for fine movements, like our fingertips. They have a lot, the muscles that we have within this area, we have a lot of nerves to control more finely the movement of our fingers. And then the nerve that controls the body movements, the skeletal muscles, will be provided by the somatic nervous system, SNS, somatic nervous system. So this somatic nervous system controls our muscles, the contraction, by voluntary control. And then when these neurons closely interact with the muscle fibers, stimulate muscle contraction. So this is an example of cell-cell interaction. You have a neuron communicating with a muscle cell. So some of you right now are writing. You are using a skeletal muscle to write. You're sending a command with your cerebral cortex about performing a specific movement. So that neuron and that nerve from that makes these neurons, this nerve, helps for us to communicate with the muscle cell, cell-to-cell communication. So here is the gross anatomy of muscles. This is the upper limb. This is the anterior part of the upper limb. So we have a muscle that is called the biceps brachii. This is the origin. This is the insertion. The origin is in the upper part of the shaft of the humerus. The insertion partly is in the ulna and partly is in the radius, in these tuberosities in here. And now, if you magnify this muscle and you see its attachment to this bone, and then you telescope out part of this muscle, you can see the components. So here we have the tendon. The tendon, it extends in this area as a fascia, which is basically a broad aponeurosis, this thick connective tissue that protects this muscle. This fascia is different from the epimysium. The fascia, it's a little bit thicker and is external than the epimysium, and the epimysium surrounds these groups that we call the fascicles. So this is the entire muscle surrounded by the epimysium. Now, if you telescope out one of these fascicles are surrounded by this membrane, the perimysium. And this fascicle is made by 10 to 100 muscle fibers. And if you telescope one of these muscle fibers are long cylindrical with striations, and they are surrounded by a thin membrane that is called the endomysium. Endo surrounds the muscle fiber. Perimysium, the fascicle, epimysium, the entire muscle, and outside of the epimysium, you have an external fascia, and then you have your tendon that connects this muscle into a bone in some cases, not always. So now let's look at individual characteristics of these components. So for fascicles, again, they are made out of 10 to 100 muscle fibers. Fibers is the other name for cells in muscle. And then these fascicles can be arranged running side to side, parallel. So this forms like a strap-like structure, and they are uniform in width. Now, some fascicles can start in a distant area, and then they can converge or go towards a central area. This is convergent. They're starting wide and going to a central point. This typically gives appearance of a triangular shaped muscle. And then you can have as well fascicles that look like a feather. So these are called pennate muscles. The fibers attached to a tendon at an angle can be unipennate or in two different angles, bipennate or at multiple angles, multipennate. Now, if the fascicles run in a circle around an opening, this will be the circular muscles. And some fibers, they start with a narrow portion, widen in the middle, and then end also in a narrow portion, like a fuse, like a spindle. So this will be fusiform. So you have a thick belly in the middle, and you have taper ends. So this is the classification of muscles based on the fascicle arrangement: parallel, convergent, pennate, circular, and fusiform. So here are the patterns of fascicles and the muscle shape. So here, in this case, the first one, you have muscle fibers, the fascicles running parallel to each other. That's why they're called parallel. And then we have this example of this muscle that help us to cross our leg, which is called the sartorius. So the fibers runs parallel to each other. Now in convergent, like in this case for pectoralis major, you have a broad origin and then you have a central insertion. So the broad origin basically is mostly here in the sternum, but also part in the clavicle and here in this area just below the sternum. And then you end up inserting this muscle into the upper part of the shaft of the humerus. So this is convergent. And then unipennate. So you have a central tendon and then angulated fibers in a single angle. Bipennate, a central tendon with fibers inserting into angles, multipennate in multiple angles. So in the case of this rectus femoris, which is one of the heads of the muscle that helps to extend our knee, we have bipennate fibers. So you have a central tendon, and then the fibers, they run like this. And now for the fusiform, in this case for fusiform, you have taper ends and a thick belly. Classical example will be the heads of the biceps brachii, the muscle that flexes our elbow. So this muscle, it is fusiform, but also it is convergent. And now circular We have it around our eyes. We have one muscle that helps us to do this. This is the orbicularis oculi. And then the muscle that help you to ask for a kiss, that's the orbicularis oris. And then multipennate. Well, we have the case of the deltoid. Deltoid, it's a broad muscle that we have here in our shoulder that has some fibers, like the anterior fibers that run like this, the middle fibers that run like this, and the posterior fibers that runs in this direction. So it's multipennate. Now, how do we name our muscles? Well, our muscles can be named based on several categories, and sometimes you can mix and match those categories to tell something about the muscle. Based on action, if the muscle flexes, you call it flexor. If it extends, extensor. If it brings a limb toward the midline, you call it adductor. Away from the midline, you call it abductor. And then you have muscles that brings the palm down. These are pronators. If we bring the palm up, supinators, etc. So you have several types of muscle names based on action. Now, based on shape, if it looks like Greek delta letter, which is in our alphabet letter D, that looks like a triangle, so this will be deltoid. Where do we have it? In here, in the shoulder. Trapezius, it looks like a trapezoid muscle. Round, it is teres. That's the Latin name for round, teres. And then based on location, if it's near to the temporal bone or above the temporal bone, it's called temporalis. If it's in the abdomen, it will be abdominis. If it's in the femur, femoris. If it's in the arm, brachii. So you can have different names according to location. According to size, if the muscle is large, you call it maximus. If it's small, minimus. If it's short, you call it brevis. If it's long, you call it longus. And then according to the direction of the fibers, if the fibers runs straight, you call it rectus. If they run in an angle, you call it oblique. If they are circular, you call it orbicularis, like forming an orbit. So then you can mix and match those names. So for instance, we have a muscle that extends the carpi, so that's extensor, and then it's extending the wrist, so that's carpi, extensor carpi. If it's in the ulnar side or if it's in the radial side, you call it propylis. So we have extensor carpi ulnaris and extensor carpi radialis. Both of them extend the carpi, but the radialis also abducts the carpi, and the ulnaris adducts the carpi. And both of them, they do the same. So as an example how you mix and match. Now, what is the functional classification of muscles? So muscles as well can be classified according to what they do in terms of whether they carry the main movement, or if they perform the main movement or not, or if they antagonize that movement. So prime movers, the muscles that are in charge of making a primary motion or movement, these are called agonists or prime movers. For instance, if your purpose is flexing the elbow, your biceps brachii will be the prime mover or agonist of elbow flexion. And then the muscles that the prime mover will be the antagonist. that do the opposite. Like in the case of who does the opposite of elbow flexion will be the triceps brachii because it extends the elbow. Now, sometimes you can switch. Like if you want to extend the elbow, then your primary muscle will be the triceps. So in this case, this is going to be the agonist. And then the antagonist is going to be the biceps. So they switch roles depending on what is your primary intention. And now we have some muscles that aids or assist the agonist by adding extra strength and stabilizing the joint to prevent unwanted movements. So in this case, you call them synergists. It helps for making this movement. And then we have some that are synergists that are specialized in stabilizing the origin of the agonist. So this will make the work to happen for contraction or contraction of that muscle much easier. So in this case, you call it a fixator. So it's a special type of synergist. And then understanding this, it helps you to understand why you have control movements and how do you maintain posture. So here is the illustration for these different muscles. So we have here when someone wants to have a drink, so it will use this muscle, the synergist, to flex the elbow, which is the biceps, and you have this agonist, which will be the brachialis in this case, because this brachialis is going to help you not do plainly this movement, but also have some sort of supination and pronation within this arm to bring the cup into your mouth. So then these two will be helping each other. So you have the agonist, which is the brachialis, and then the synergist, which is the biceps brachii, and then you have this fixator, which is the supraspinatus, that helps to keep this head of the humerus inside this glenoid cavity, helping for these muscles to make the movement much efficiently. And then once this person finish drinking, it will be releasing this effort by contracting the triceps brachii. So that's the antagonist. Questions? Okay, now, origin. Origin is the fixed or less movable muscle attachment. Usually it's proximal or medial. Acts as an anchor during contraction. Insertion, it is the movable attachment, typically is distal or lateral, and it is the point where the muscle forces to produce a movement. You don't need to know all the details about the origin and insertion for every single muscle, but whenever you're reading or you're looking in a model where the origin and the insertion, you just have to figure out what is going to happen with the movement based on this. So it's not difficult to understand this. So since this is the fixed point, the origin and insertion is the movable point, the insertion moves towards the origin during contraction. Exceptions will be in muscles that crosses multiple joints. The origin and insertion may switch roles depending on which muscles and are activated, like for instance the fixators, and which bones you are trying to stabilize or move. So for instance, we have this muscle that is called iliopsoas. It is an abdominal muscle, but also inserts into the femur. So this one, when you are standing and you contract it, it can help you to do this. Like you can flex the thorax and the abdomen towards your thigh, or when you are laying supine, you can bring up the femur against the abdomen and the thorax. So it depends, like when the femur is fixed, or if it's not fixed, or when the pelvis and the vertebral column moves. How are you going to perform that movement? So then again, once you start seeing these images of these muscles and looking how the fibers run, which joints they might cross, some of them, you can understand the movement, the action. So let's see this example. So we have the biceps brachii, that it has the origin in the coracoid process of the scapula. If you remember, this is a coracoid process, and in the supraglenoid tubercle, which is like a tiny pointed projection above the glenoid cavity in the scapula. And then you have the long head of the biceps and the short head of the biceps crossing now this elbow joint. So if you see here, we have then one joint that it has been crossed and a second joint that it has been crossed by this muscle, two joints. And now this is the origin and this is the insertion, and then one of the insertions is going to be in the radial tuberosity of the radius just below the head. So one of the movements that is going to happen, if you think about it, is when you shorten this muscle, like if you bring the fibers close together, if you have your arm extended, your forearm extended, as you contract, it's going to go up this elbow joint. So you will be bringing these two bones together. This is flexion. And now, if you contract this head more than this, not only you will be doing this, but also you will be doing this. And if you contract this other head more, the short head like this, you can do this type of movement too. So you can have it neutral or have flexion and medial movement, or flexion and lateral movement. Now, what are the lever systems? So levers are physical systems that helps for reducing the work when you are carrying a load. So a lever system has four parts. The lever that actually is the bone that acts as a rigid bar, and then the load, which is the resistance to be moved, the force, that it is the contraction that you need to exert to carry the load, and then you have a middle point, or well, a fulcrum, which is the joint that acts as a pivot. So we have three classes of levers. So we have the first class, which you have the fulcrum in the middle. The second class, which you have the load in the middle. And then the third class, where you have the force in the middle. And if you see here, for this letter that I put in bold, it tells you what is in the middle. So in this case, first class is the fulcrum. Second class, it has an O and a D, which means the load is in the middle. And then third class, which it has one R, will be the force in the middle. Just to help you to memorize what is in the middle. So here are some examples of this type of levers. So for first class, in which the fulcrum is in the middle, remember, because that's like the first letter of the first class. So we have in the body the atlanto-occipital joint. So in this case, you will have an advantage or a disadvantage like a seesaw. So it is highly movable. It helps to carry a heavy weight, in this case our head, and the advantage of this is that you can carry a heavy weight, but the disadvantage is that you have to use a lot of force. So our trapezius muscle and our sternocleidomastoid muscles, which helps to carry the weight of the head, will have to generate a lot of energy in order to carry the weight of the head. As we age, we don't have as much strength in our muscles, in these muscles. So we tend to stoop. And then that can lead to problems. Now in the second class, remember the load is in the middle. We have the body example, the metatarsophalangeal joint, which is the joint between the head of the metatarsals and the phalanges in our foot. And then an example is standing in your toes. So in this case, a small force can move a large load. Some people may wonder, and I mean, more than anything else, it's just a matter of equilibrium. But some people wonder why when someone uses heels, they don't get as tired as when you use flat shoes. Why? Because you don't use a lot of force. You have more relaxation of your muscles. Sometimes the tiredness is just a matter of balance, keeping balance, especially if you have stilettos. Those ones are really hard to maintain the balance. And now for third class, which is in this case the force is in the middle, like in the case of the elbow flexion with the aid of the biceps brachii, you have a mechanical disadvantage. You will sacrifice your force for speed and range. So you have not so much range, and then the speed is going to be also a problem. So you cannot flex as easily. So here we have the overview of these three types of levers. So fulcrum here in the middle for first class, you have a load and you have a force. And again, these will represent in one of the endings the muscles, in this case for our body, that carry the load. Of course, I mean, a child versus an adult, in this case, I mean, the load is very easy, right? But put it the other way around. It's like when you are young, you have very strong muscles, and then you can carry that load. But as you age, it will be the other way around. Your muscles will weaken, and then your load will be heavy, and then you will be all tired. Second class, the load in the middle, fulcrum on one edge, and then the force in the other edge. So, again, standing in your toes. So you don't have to exert as much force to carry a big load because you have that advantage of having this force in the middle. Sorry, the load in the middle. And now for the force in the middle, which is the third one, the third class. So again, is the biceps brachii inflection of the elbow. So the elbow joint is the fulcrum. The force is whatever you're carrying. In this case, is the muscle, the biceps brachii, and then you're carrying a load, in this case, a dumbbell. And then you can, of course, do this movement, but it is not a wide range. And then it depends on how much load you have, whether you will have high speed or not. The heavier the load, the lower the speed. Okay, so those were the lever classes. Do you have any questions? Okay, now let's look at individual muscles. So let's look at the muscles of facial expression. So the muscles of facial expression are located in our face, and as its name implies, help us to show our emotions. Unless you're a poker player, you can't. Well, you won't, more than likely. And then, but most of us, we can hide our emotions, guys. And this is kind of one of the controversies. Why, if it's under voluntary control, we cannot hide our emotions? So, as a commonality, these muscles are innervated by cranial nerve number 7, which is the facial nerve, if you remember. And these muscles mainly are attached to the skin rather than bones, allow them to create the facial expressions. So some of the actions including raising our eyebrows, closing our eyes, smiling, frowning, puckering the lips, and tensing the skin of our neck. And we will see some of these individual actions of these muscles, but when someone has paralysis of this facial nerve, you will have something called Bell's palsy. And this Bell's palsy can be caused by many etiologies or factors, including some viral infections. Sometimes it's permanent, sometimes it's temporary. It takes a while for the person to recover. And most than likely, it's going to be only one side of the face affected. If you present a person with a picture that the person has paralysis of one of the sides of the facial nerve, you will kind of see it, and then you will see a side wrinkly and the other one very smooth. People confuse thinking that the side that it is smooth, it is the healthy side, and the one that is wrinkly, the wrinkly side. No, since you cannot contract your muscles on that side, it will be like all smooth. That will be the side that it is affected. Something that happens as well, because a person cannot close really well their eyelids, is that they will have dryness in one of their eyes. Of course, the eyes the the side of the eye that is affected. So, specific muscles and their actions. So we have here in the frontal area, the frontalis muscle. The frontalis muscle is part of the fronto-occipitalis muscle. That it is joined, so we have the frontalis portion here, the occipitalis portion here, and then we have a membrane that holds the two heads that is called galea aponeurotica. This frontalis, its action is to raise the eyebrows and wrinkle the forehead. And the occipitalis basically wrinkles this, the skin in this area. It is one of these muscles that, I mean, some people, I don't know how they do it, but they can contract it really well. Others we won't. Like some of the muscles I will see, like the auricularis, some people can move their auricularis muscles and they can move their ears, but most of us, we have rudimentary action. But anyway, so that's the action of frontalis, raising the eyebrows and wrinkling the forehead. Corrugator supercilii. This one is located here in the glabella area. So, yes, that's the action, looking with suspicion to someone. Frowning. And drawing the eyebrows medially. Orbicularis oculi, blinking. Closes your eyes, your eyelids. Levator labii superioris, elevates the upper lip. Levator means elevation, bringing up. You will see another one in the scapula. It's called levator scapularis. And then zygomaticus, minor and major. In which bone will these two muscles will be inserted? Zygomaticus, minor and major. In the zygomatic, in the cheekbone. So this pulls the commissure of the lips, the area where the two lips connect, pulls it up and to the side. So these two muscles are the muscles of sincere smiling. You can tell when someone is sincere or not. Let's be friends. It's not a sincere smile. Okay, so that one, let's be friends, I mean, well, I already activated my zygomaticus, so I can stop it. But basically, like the one that you use for portrait pictures when you don't know how to smile really nicely, that's the risorius. Risorius means laughter, or risa. Risa in Spanish is laughter. But that's only moving sideways your commissure of your lips, not up, as a sincere smile. And here you have it, risorius. Draw the corner of the mouth laterally. And then levator angulae oris elevates the corner of your mouth. So these two, zygomaticus plus this levator angulae oris, are synergistic for a sincere smile. And then buccinator compresses the cheek when whistling or blowing. So that's a buccinator. And then orbicularis oris, together with the buccinator, helps you do this. So orbicularis oris closes and protrudes your lips. And then the muscles of sadness, depressor labii inferioris, and depressor angulae oris. So when someone is sad, we'll have the action of these muscles. Mentalis basically protrudes the lower lip like pouting. Okay? Platysma, it's a broad superficial muscle in the neck. This one is very thin, it's just subcutaneous underneath our skin. Tenses the skin of our neck. When someone shaves this area, they tense the skin of their neck. Cats have it extensively in their dorsum. It's a platysma. When the cats get scared, their fur goes up, they're activating their platysma. So here is the location of the muscles of facial expression. This is the epicranialis or galla aponeurotica. So this is the membrane, the aponeurosis that connects these frontalis muscles with the occipitalis. So this is the one that raises our eyebrows. Here we have the corrugator supercilii, the one that does this. They didn't tell something about the nasalis muscles, but the nasalis muscles help us to widen the opening of our nares, of our nose, so that we can bring more air. And then this is the orbicularis oculi, and then that one is the one that helps us to close our eyes. And then here we have levator labii superioris, then zygomaticus minor and major, and then this is the risorius here, depressor angulae oris, depressor labii inferioris, mentalis, and platysma. We will see it later together with the muscles of the eye, the extrinsic muscles of the eye. But in here, in this area, we have a muscle that is called levator, I forgot the name. I can tell that. If someone finds it, you will get a name. Oh my gosh. Well, that one elevates the eyelid, the superior eyelid. So that one is innervated by cranial nerve number 3, which is oculomotor. I've seen it in soap operas, in novellas, but that muscle, it is considered not muscle of facial expression, but it can be helpful for communicate. When someone has a stroke and the person loses his ability to write, to speak, the person can still communicate by blinking and might not be even able to move the muscles of facial expression. So 1 blink, yes, 2 blinks, no, for instance. Levator palpebrae superioris, that's the name. So that's innervated by cranial nerve number 7. So in that case, see why we have sometimes exceptions to the rule for innervating muscles. So, but we will see it, well, here it is, part of these muscles, we will see it in here. So, extrinsic eye muscles. So these muscles are important to move our eyeball in different directions. And these are one of the muscles that basically has a lot of innervation. Because, I mean, if something we wanted to control more is the eyes. For instance, to read, to drive, to find ourselves where we are without tripping. So they require a lot of precision and control. And we have several muscles. All of these are attached into the outer region of our eye that is called the sclera, and they are inserted into the bones of the orbit. So we have 4 rectuses. The fibers, remember, run straight, and depending on where they are located is how you name them. So The one that is above the eyeball, this will be the superior rectus. The one below will be the inferior rectus. The one medial to our eyeball will be the medial rectus. The one lateral will be the lateral rectus. Superior rectus, if you contract it, you will be looking up. Inferior rectus, if you contract it, you will be looking down. Lateral rectus to the sides. And then medial rectus, you will be crossing your eyes. So those are the actions. And then we have two obliques, superior and inferior. So superior oblique help us to look down and out. That's the cheater's muscle. And then the intellectual muscle will be inferior oblique. So it's like you are thinking deeply. And this is the innervation. So most of our extrinsic eye muscles are innervated by oculomotor nerve, cranial nerve. Remember, CN, abbreviation stands for cranial nerve. So cranial nerve number 3. So innervates superior, inferior, and medial rectus. So 3 of the rectuses, plus the inferior oblique. And then trochlear, or cranial nerve number 4, innervates the superior oblique, while abducens, or cranial nerve number 6, innervates the lateral rectus. Remember, abduction is moving something away from the midline. So lateral rectus, moving our eyes to the sides away from the midline, will be by abducens nerve, abducts the eye. So these are the innervation of these muscles. So here we have the location of these muscles. So here is the superior rectus, inferior rectus, this one, lateral rectus, medial rectus, and then superior oblique, inferior oblique, and above the superior oblique we have the levator palpebrae superioris. And they all together go and merge their tendons into this tendinous ring. And then the superior oblique has a little tendon that runs in this kind of a hook that is called trochlea. So this one is the one that is innervated by cranial nerve number 4, this one by cranial nerve number 6, and then the rest by cranial nerve number 3, oculomotor. Questions about the extrinsic eye muscles? Okay, I have a question. What will be the eye movement type after someone has paralysis of cranial nerve number 6, abducens, either bilateral or unilateral? The eyeball will deviate towards where? Up, down, medially, or laterally when you have cranial nerve number 6, abducens nerve paralysis. Or away. It can go a little bit down, that's for sure. Medial. Because basically our eyes, guys, by itself will tend to go medially and down. And these abducens and the inferior oblique, what they do is they bring it up and to the side so we can look centrally like this. But when the muscle, like the lateral rectus, is not innervated, becomes weak, then the eyes tend to go medially and a little bit down. So that's one example of paralysis. Now for muscles of mastication, well, the function is closing and moving the jaw during chewing and speaking. Enable movements like elevation of our jaw, depression of our jaw, so opening our jaw, closing our jaw, protrusion, which is basically bringing your jaw anteriorly, and retraction, move it backwards and sideways for grinding. This is another general type of function in our body that we control. Sometimes accidentally, yes, you bite your tongue and you say, oh, how good I taste. But at the expense of pain when you bite your tongue. But in essence, all these movements work together to help for us to grind the food. I mean, cows, they don't have manners, I guess, and they're chewing sideways and very grossly their movements. But in us, we control these movements pretty well. And these movements are given by these muscles: masseter, temporalis, medial pterygoid, and lateral pterygoid. And these are innervated by cranial nerve number 5, which is trigeminal nerve, the mandibular branch, or B3. That's the third branch of the cranial nerve number 5. Cranial nerve number 5 is called trigeminal because he has 3 major branches. So if you subdivide it like this, they provide innervation to these different areas: ophthalmic, maxillary, and mandibular. So, in the case of the masseter, it is located going from the temporalis, from the temporal bone up to the mandible here in the mandibular angle, part of the body, and then the ramus. The fibers runs like this. So whenever we close this masseter, if you clench your teeth, you can feel it. So it elevates, the masseter elevates your mandible. Temporalis is a synergist of closing your mouth. So elevates and retracts the mandible. So when you clench your teeth, you will not only feel your masseter here on the side of the mandibular angle, but also you can feel the contraction of your temporalis, which we have here in the squamous region of your temporal bone. Medial pterygoid. It is located in the medial pterygoid area of your sphenoid, like the little protrusion that goes down from your sphenoid that looks like the feet of the bat with the greater wings and lesser wings extended like this. So it's like a little bat when you see it anteriorly the bone, and it has like the medial pterygoid plates, the lateral pterygoid plates. So this medial pterygoid, it's also a synergist for closing our mouth, elevates the mandible, and assists in grinding. Now the depressor of the jaw will be the lateral pterygoid, and also protract the mandible. Protraction is bring it backwards, and then depression and side-to-side movements, like this is called lateral excursion. So your jaw has a special type of movements. Will be elevation, depression, and then it has lateral excursion and medial excursion. Lateral excursion will be going to the sides, medial excursion going to the middle. And it also goes anteriorly, which is protraction, posteriorly, which is called retraction. Possibly I was saying retraction before for this one, no, it's protraction. So do this type of movement. And then again, all of these muscles of mastication are innervated by trigeminal nerve, the third branch, which is mandibular branch. So here are the muscles of mastication. So this is the squama of the temporal bone. It is covered by the temporalis. The temporalis goes and inserts from this area into the cornoid notch of your mandible. So is this muscle convergent, parallel, fusiform? pennate muscle. What type of muscle is the temporalis? Based on the arrangement of the fascicles.
It's almost like the one in the front and the back, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. So it's convergent, right? It starts broad and then goes into a narrow portion. And then look at this masseter. So inserts here in the zygomatic arch and partly in the body of the mandible and also in the angle and in the rams. And then this is the buccinator. The buccinator, its function is to contract and move the foot from the vestibule, the area between the gums and the teeth and the cheek, bring it back into the oral cavity proper, which is the area between our teeth. So any foot that will go into the vestibule is supposed to go back by the contraction of the buccinator. And then in here we have the pterygoids, the lateral and the medial. So all of these muscles are, with the exception of this, that we know that it tucks your cheek, but these muscles are elevators together with the medial pterygoid of the jaw, and the lateral is the exception. It depresses the jaw. So now for muscles involved in swallowing and neck movement. So we have a muscle in our neck area, next to our oral cavity, it's called the gastric. It has two bellies, the anterior and the posterior. In between the two bellies, we have a little tendon that runs by a little extension of the tendinous extension of the hyoid bone that helps to elevate the hyoid bone and open the jaw. Now, mylohyoid we have in the floor of our mouth elevates the hyoid and the tongue during swallowing. So if you swallow saliva, and if you feel here your floor of your mouth, feel that contraction, that's the mylohyoid. The stylohyoid elevates and retracts the hyoid bone. It runs between the stylo process of your temporal bone and the upper edge of the hyoid. So anything that elevates the hyoid, like these three, the gastric, mylohyoid, and stylohyoid, are called the suprahyoid muscles. And then the infrahyoid muscles depresses the hyoid bone, like in the case of the sternohyoid. Tell me, based on this name, sternohyoid, what is the origin and insertion of this muscle? In the sternum. And then, what is the other point of attachment? The hyoid, right? Sternum and the hyoid. So it tells you something. What about this other one, omohyoid? And it has two bellies, superior and inferior. That one you won't get it. There's another name for the scapula that is called omoplate. So this one is another one that depresses the hyoid bone and depresses the larynx. So typically this helps for swallowing, including the thyrohyoid, which is located between what and what? Thyroid cartilage and the hyoid bone. So this one elevates the larynx. And then the sternothyroid, which depresses the thyroid cartilage. And then sternocleidomastoid is these powerful muscles that we have here on the sides of the neck. So this one rotates and flexes the head and is part of the accessory muscles of respiration. So this one does this when they act unilaterally, but bilaterally helps to keep our head extended. And it's called sternocleidomastoid because it runs between the sternum, the clavicle, and the mastoid process. So this is one of the exceptions to the rules where you have the origin distal and the point of insertion, which is in the mastoid process, which will be proximal. So these are muscles then involved in neck movement and swallowing. Any questions? Okay, so we will stop in here and we will continue next time.